Thank you, Madam Speaker, and as I rise to contribute to the debate before the House, we want to discuss this bill and make sure that our words and actions have real consequences in this place. By trivialising incredibly difficult subjects like health addictions, we are doing a disservice to fellow Territorians. As some members will be aware, Madam Speaker, we have debated a bill substantially similar to this previously in the Legislative Assembly of the past. And I will not attempt to repeat myself too much, but I do not believe that the reintroduction of monetary fines in the Liquor Act will have any meaningful impact when it comes to addressing problem drinking in public areas across the Northern Territory. Since the 1970s, Madam Speaker, all Australian jurisdictions have recognised that the criminalisation of public drunkenness is inappropriate and indeed ineffective, and have legislated to remove the offence from their statute books. In 1991, Madam Speaker, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was clear. Criminalising public drunkenness had a disproportionate effect on the incarceration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. It made a clear recommendation that the offence of public drinking should be decriminalised. It wasn't a recommendation by a woke lefty lawyer who knew nothing about the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. It was made by James Muirhead, a former judge of the Territory Supreme Court and the administrator of the Northern Territory appointed during the former CLP government of the Marshall-Perrin era. And Mr Muirhead was the Royal Commissioner who gave this very recommendation through the Royal Commission. By passing this legislation, the Territory will be reverting to something that we know does not work for a long period of time and which has failed Territorians and our communities in the past. We know that alcohol-related harm, Madam Speaker, is one of the most pressing issues in the Northern Territory. We wish that wasn't true, but it is a reality. We have never shied away from that, and no government in the history of the Territory, or indeed even our previous Labor government, no government has ever ignored that. When we were in government, Madam Speaker, did work on a suite of measures required to tackle alcohol harm across the Territory and to look at the health effects and impacts for Territorians. The old Liquor Act, which was first passed in 1978, was confusing. It was disjointed and it did not reflect our contemporary practices across our communities, and it did not properly regulate the consumption of liquor in the Northern Territory. And to fix this, Madam Speaker, the former Labor government undertook the Riley Review, the most comprehensive review on alcohol policy and alcohol legislation in the Northern Territory's history. From this review, Madam Speaker, Justice Trevor Riley, a very respected judge who undertook the review, had 120 recommendations through this process. Our former Labor government adopted 119 of these recommendations from Justice Riley and the independent review on alcohol in the Northern Territory. And the one recommendation that we didn't adopt, Madam Speaker, was around closing bottle shops on a Sunday across the NT. That was the only recommendation that we did not accept or agree to. All 119 others we did, Madam Speaker, and we undertook that work to implement those recommendations in our former Labor government. Madam Speaker, in regards to public drinking, Northern Territory's police submission to the review said that the old system was confusing to the community. It was confusing to tourists and it was confusing to our law enforcement officers. We listened to our NT Police and we worked hard to fix the problem that they faced in finding a solution which was focused on an evidence-based manner. When we rewrote the Northern Territory Liquor Act, we made sure that it was still against the law to drink in public in our major centres and within 2 kilometres of any licensed premises. We made sure that the NT Police had a large range of powers at their disposal to better tackle public drinking, Madam Speaker. And some of these powers included being able to take people into custody if they appeared to be intoxicated and may be at risk or causing harm to themselves or someone else. Charging someone in engaging in riotous, offensive, disorderly or indecent behaviour in public. issuing banning notices for offences in high-risk areas to prevent or reduce the further occurrence of alcohol-related violence in the area. Madam Speaker, it is in our Labor view that alcohol misuse is a health issue, and fining people, throwing them into watchhouses and prisons will not necessarily help the underlying issues that a person may face with their health and alcohol. Madam Speaker, we believe the bill will not serve as a deterrent to any of this misuse of alcohol in our communities. A person with multiple health issues, including addiction, will not be deterred by the threat of a monetary fine, which is what the CLP is proposing through the amendments of this legislation. This is why our previous Labor government invested in community patrols to take a person to a suitable place of safety, sobering up shelters to recover safely and health services, and introduce connection to health services such as nurses in watch houses, EDs when needed, and brief interventions and pathways to education, counselling and targeted treatment programs around alcohol harm. This is a real risk, and what this bill we believe will do, Madam Speaker, is it will lead to over-policing, over-punishment and over-incarceration of Aboriginal Territorians, an increased risk of a death in custody, the sidelining of health and medical professionals in stepping out and working with an individual or a family or a group around the harms of alcohol and the professional care that they can receive. The only thing this bill proves is that the CLP is all spin and no substance when it comes to protecting the community. We want to see the investment into preventative matters, Madam Speaker. We want to see the investment into our health services that will really target this type of behaviour to be able to support an individual, their family or their community in being able to understand and to step away from harm of alcohol. Madam Speaker, we are seeing a very concerning trend by the new CLP government already when it comes to ignoring health and frontline professionals and expert advice. Last week, more than 200 community leaders and representatives from across the Territory community in the areas of health and across our Aboriginal research organisations, they wrote to the Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, to call on the CLP government to keep in place measures that work to reduce alcohol-related harm. It is unbelievable, Madam Speaker, that just over 50 days in, that the CLP government is already telling people that they do not understand, respect or listen to the experts. And that, in the same vein, it is unbelievable that we are seeing people in our community telling the CLP to do their job properly already in just over 50 days of governing so far, Madam Speaker. We're talking about Territory doctors and nurses. We're talking about Territory-based frontline health experts, Madam Speaker, who are literally pleading in writing to the CLP government to prioritise the health and wellbeing and safety of all families and communities here in the Northern Territory. And last week, the new member for Karama's very first question was about the river of grog in his community. Well, the member for Karama is definitely in for a shock, Madam Speaker, when the member for Barkly, one of his CLP ministers, makes it even easier for problem drinkers in the Territory to access cheaper alcohol, cheaper grog, Madam Speaker, when the CLP intends to scrap the minimum floor price of alcohol units accessible in the community. This just does not make sense, Madam Speaker, and we really and truly honestly hope that the CLP government will listen to those 200 plus experts in the community and not scrap the minimum floor price of alcohol. You say and you recognise that alcohol harm is one of the most alarming issues across the Territory, and on the other hand, the CLP government is saying, yeah, let's make cheap grog more accessible to the community. It does not make sense, Madam Speaker. And I know the CLP government will not listen to the Labor opposition, but I absolutely urge you to listen to those 200 plus experts in the community, particularly in the health sector, to make sure that your decision is based on expert and evidence and advice, as opposed to what you think and your opinion may or may not work. You don't have to know all the answers in government. That's what your experts are for. That's what the public service is for, and that's what those experts in the community sector and particularly the health sector are for. Please, please, please listen to them, CLP government. Madam Speaker, alcoholism is often tied to mental health issues and, unfortunately, domestic violence. And we are now seeing generations of young people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. Now, when it comes to giving police the power to issue on-the-spot fines, this will do nothing to change that fact. Madam Speaker, the CLP can no longer use the excuse of opposition for poorly written legislation or poorly written regulations. They have the experts at their fingertip. They have the experts at their beck and call. The CLP has promised Territorians to deliver. But the CLP will fail Territorians when they are not focusing on robust and important legislative reform. And if it's just related to pride and ego, please drop that and listen to our experts in the Territory. Madam Speaker, instead of listening to those who have been working in this field and sector for decades, the CLP have gone in wanting to say they're solutions-based and focused. However, they will be doomed by their own ego if they fail to lead and they fail to lead the Territory into safer community. If they continue to provide conditions that are unsafe for our Territory, if they do not support the work that has already been done in this space to strengthen it rather than weaken it. Madam Speaker, Territorians deserve to have the best legislation possible in our community, and that's what our jobs are here in this place. We want to ensure that legislation that is brought through the Territory Parliament serves to protect and to govern our communities across our 25 electorates in the best possible way. And it will not be an easy fix. The CLP, I'm sure, are learning that already. And if it was simple, Madam Speaker, we would have done it years ago. It would have been solved already. The type of investment and perseverance in an area like alcohol harm deserves to be treated in a serious manner, Madam Speaker. We want to ensure that the CLP government takes its commitments to reality, but the focus on steps to fix this problem, Madam Speaker, needs to be led by experts in the Territory. Madam Speaker, this legislation does not make current situation in our public areas any better. And again, we see the CLP failing to talk about or invest in prevention. They are always focused on the consequences and punitive measures. If we are to ever see a change in the Territory, Madam Speaker, we implore the CLP government to continue that good work that was led by an independent review on alcohol by Justice Trevor Riley, to ensure that all of the measures, no quick fixes, we know that, but all of the measures are implemented so that they can impact on the community in a positive way, so we can make the Territory better, so we can make the Territory safe together. And Madam Speaker, we want to ensure the CLP government does their job for Territorians like they promised when it comes to ensuring that legislation that we debate in the House will actually make our community safer. And we don't think that this is what is happening, this particular legislation. Madam Speaker, we know Territorians expect and indeed deserve to have the best contemporary, modern legislation and regulation in the Northern Territory to ensure that it makes the Territory a better place. This bill brought forward by the CLP government fails to do that, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on the liquor Further Amendment Bill 2024. I'd like to begin by talking about an issue that I've raised before because it is very important for what we discussed today. I previously talked about the coroner's report into the death of Yingiya Langdon. He was a Warlpiri man, and he was an elder, educator, and artist, and sadly he died in custody at the age of 58. Yingiya Langdon was reported to have been drinking in the public place. He was issued with an infringement notice, which was $74 fine, and taken into custody under Section 133AB of the Police Administration Act that empowers police to take someone into custody for infringement notice offences for up to 4 hours or longer if they are intoxicated. This is known as a paperless arrest, and despite promises by Labor to appeal it, it still exists today. These paperless arrest powers, combined with this new bill that we debate today, allows for an infringement notice for a nuisance public drinker, and this can lead to arrest, court, and a maximum fine of over $900. This creates greater concern that we will see many Aboriginal people being detained. The coroner, Mr. Greg Kavanagh, outlined that at the time of Yingiya's arrest, a police special operation known as Operation Askari 2 was running. The mission statement of the antisocial behaviour incidents throughout the Darwin and Casuarina regions, this resulted in many people being picked up in public parks, maybe all of whom were Aboriginal. The coroner stated that Yingiya Langdon, a sick middle-aged Aboriginal man, was treated like a criminal and incarcerated like a criminal. He died in a police cell which was built to house criminals. He died in his sleep with strangers in this coal and concrete cell. He died of natural causes, but he was entitled to die in peace. In the comfort of family and friends, in my view, he was entitled to die as a free man. The coroner also reflected on the iniquity of the laws in relation to public drinking. He stated, "I agree with the submission of counsel of Yingiya's family that he was an old man minding his own business, enjoying the company of family and friends in an early evening of the dry season. He had been drinking but had done nothing to bring himself to the attention of police beyond being with the other Aboriginal people in the park in Darwin CBD. Located just one street away from Spillett Park, where Yingiya was enjoying a quiet drink with friends, a host of pubs and bars extending down Mitchell Street in the Darwin CBD. Those establishments have a fresco drinking areas that are popular with non-Indigenous locals and tourists, many of whom imbibe large amounts of alcohol. The new laws create a system where a large portion of population drinks freely in pubs and taverns using sections of pub footpaths that have been fenced off for outdoor drinking. Just one street away, however, Aboriginal people, some of whom come in from remote communities that have alcohol banned and who choose to live outdoors in the long grass, are being detained for drinking in a designated public place, even if they are enjoying a peaceful life, quiet time with family and friends. The deprivation of liberty and differential treatment it results in is unacceptable. Madam Speaker, those words come from the coroner's report from 2015, but they are just as important today for this bill that is before us. This bill talks about public nuisance, but the term public nuisance is not defined. It makes me wonder, I am a public nuisance. Was the old man Langdon, or Yingiya Langdon rather, in Spillett Park a public nuisance? Are we just public nuisance because of colour of our skin? Politicians use phrases like public nuisance and antisocial behaviour. It creates an anti-Aboriginal rhetoric and dehumanises people and turns them into the scapegoat of broader problems and collective anger. As the narrative spreads across the political spectrum, it creates dangerous consequences. It legitimizes discrimination. It gives permission for the broader public to blame Aboriginal people for the problems they are experiencing. The language we hear equates Aboriginal people with crime and creates an idea that we are all dangerous, out of control and destructive. This language does not encourage people to understand our perspective, our culture, our law. It it creates a division between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And it is a division that has been created by many governments, but these bills that have been debated in this sitting for Parliament contribute and elevate to the increasing division between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the entity today. Madam Speaker, Martin Luther King wrote about equality, and he often outlined that many white people, even well-meaning people, think that equality means black people have to improve. This is not correct. What we all need to do is eliminate systemic racism so that we all have equal opportunities and are treated fairly. We need to have two-way institutions so that both cultures can exist side by side. Luther said that white people must begin to walk in the pathways of black brothers and feel some of the pain and hurt that throb without light up in their daily lives. I don't think the people in this chamber on the government side understand the daily pain of Aboriginal people, and I do as well. These 5 bills that target Aboriginal people and reinforce and grow systemic racism in our communities so that they are willing to compound the problems. They are willing to continue to jail generations of Aboriginal people instead of working with us. We are to become the scapegoats of systemic issues that many governments have chosen not to fix. Madam Speaker, I speak to take non-Aboriginal children. Sorry, Madam Speaker, if I were to take non-Aboriginal children and put them in a classroom with a language they didn't understand and then tell them they are failures when they cannot speak, read or write in that language, that you might understand just a small part of the frustration that we have felt and feel. Madam Speaker, today the government are introducing a fine for people who are troubled by alcohol abuse, which is the health issue, a medical issue. This government wants to hand out fines for a medical disorder to people who are homeless. They are not homeless in terms of country, but they are homeless because they are homeless because when they do not know a home to go to, sit inside legally sit inside and illegally drink. Madam Speaker, this is a disgrace. It makes me very angry that there are people here in this chamber who support these actions, knowing that it may cause considerable harm. Yingiya Langdon died in a jail prison and a jail cell. He was robbed of a dignified death, despite knowing the failings of the bills that the government have passed last week, and this week they continue to push ahead with no care for welfare of Aboriginal people. Thank you, Chair.
Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I agree that we cannot have any more deaths. I agree that alcohol causes major harm and trouble in our communities. As stated by the Chief Minister within the media, this suite of amendments brought forth by the CLP government gives police the power to intervene early in nuisance public drinking, but this raises the critical question, why are we continuing to give police the responsibility to address what is fundamentally a public health issue? We've already heard in this chamber that problematic drinking behaviour often stems from deeper issues such as mental health conditions, trauma, poverty and social isolation. By framing the issue as a nuisance to be policed, we're ignoring the complex health and social factors that drive individuals to drink in public spaces. And I also want to add, as the member for Mulka said, people have a right to drink in public places. Instead of providing the appropriate support systems, mental health services, addiction treatment and outreach programs, we're resorting to punitive measures that do little to address those root causes. Addiction cannot always be a personal responsibility, Attorney General. It's a public health issue and we need to support Territorians through this. Claims that alcohol is a dirty word, we need to look at that because it stems from the stigmatisation of a health issue and stigmatisation that we worsen with the passing of this legislation. Stigmatisation that we, as members of this Assembly, have let get out of hand because we cannot acknowledge the root causes of this issue. We know that alcohol-related harms cause significant impact to our communities. We're looking at increased family, domestic and sexual violence. More than 200 community leaders, as we heard from the Leader of the Opposition, and health professionals have urged the Chief Minister to consider how proposed alcohol legislation by the CLP will increase this violence. I want to highlight that the Chief Minister has not yet responded to this open letter. Empowering police to intervene in these situations risks further criminalisation of vulnerable communities, particularly those who are already marginalised. People with addiction, people experiencing homelessness and First Nations communities are disproportionately affected by laws that treat public drinking as a criminal issue. And it also increases the risk of serious harm and even death, as we've heard in the case of Yingiya Langdon, described by the member for Mulka. These amendments may give police more authority to intervene early, but what they're really doing is entrenching cycles of disadvantage and pushing those most in need of help further away from the services they require. Addressing alcohol-related public behaviour through fines and policing does not provide long-term solutions. If we truly want to address public drinking and its impacts on the community, we must invest in health-based interventions, not enforcement. This means prioritising harm reduction strategies, increasing funding for mental health and addiction services, and ensuring that people have access to housing and other social supports. These are the measures that will lead to safer communities, not through the expansion of police powers. This government claims that they're rushing through all of this legislation as a matter of urgency for the safety of all Territorians. But how is safety prioritised when this government could not bother with the necessary evaluation and consultation that actually safeguards our communities? There's been zero community consultation done on this legislation, and it seems that this government therefore has no intention to understand the impacts and the unintended consequences of it. In the week that I have had to go through this legislation, I've made the time to consult with community experts and people in my electorate. And I've made the time for this because I care about how the decisions we make in this chamber will affect everyone outside it. I will be proposing some amendments later to this bill, and I'll talk to them when we come to that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers?
Yes.
Member for Nycliffe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Jurisdictions the world over recognise that the most effective way to tackle alcohol addiction is to treat it as a health issue, not a criminal one. So who will this new legislation target? It will target people experiencing homelessness and other complex needs. Where is the plan to actually address the underlying causes of public intoxication? Minister Boothby, I find it disappointing that you are willing to dismiss Territorians who are clearly suffering addiction and immense difficulties in their lives as drunks. The label of drunks and the derision with which you spoke of them was shameful. I had hoped that in this place we, as representatives of the Territory, could debate these issues professionally and treat all Territorians with respect. To me, there is a concerning underlying tone here. This amendment and this entire debate is aimed at normalising drinking in white communities and criminalising drinking by Aboriginal people. Let us remind this House that historically in the Territory, we drink more per capita than any other state or territory for both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal populations. The difference is the addition of homelessness, poverty and intergenerational trauma in one section of our population. We are seeing a public health issue being treated as a criminal one. This is another example of the CLP placing the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Alcohol is ripping our community apart. It is fueling addiction, poverty, domestic violence and ruining people's lives. And yet, instead of addressing the roaring trade that the alcohol industry is making from the misery around us, the CLP is going after those who are copping the brunt of it. Last week, I asked the Chief Minister whether she could assure me that the appointment of a major alcohol lobbyist as her Chief of Staff would not skew the CLP's alcohol policy in favour of the alcohol industry and their sales. She did not directly answer the question. The CLP is punishing public drunkenness while at the same time repealing minimum unit pricing. This is perverse logic. Raising the price of alcohol is the most effective and cost-effective way to reduce alcohol harms, and the alcohol lobby knows this. The research shows that by increasing the cost, people, and especially people with issues around alcohol, tend to buy less. This in turn impacts the bottom line of alcohol and retail companies, which is why they've come out against it. What's clear to me is that the alcohol industry needs to be locked out of the decision-making table. They have too much influence on our policies. Research has shown that the introduction of a floor price has resulted in a 14% reduction in alcohol-related assaults in the NT, a 21% reduction in alcohol-involved domestic and family violent assaults, and a 19% reduction in alcohol-related emergency department attendances. But the minimum floor price was not indexed to inflation. So over time, the impact has been minimised and is not as effective as it could be. Keeping the minimum unit pricing and indexing this price will have ongoing positive impacts on alcohol outcomes, reducing violence and improving health outcomes in our community. No one measure is going to solve this, especially as the underlying causes of poverty and disadvantage are not even being considered. But why take away one measure that is actually showing a positive effect, even if it is small? It is an improvement nonetheless. But instead, the CLP is taking away this very effective measure, increasing access to cheap alcohol, while there is an undeniable public health issue related to alcohol. Increasing access to alcohol and at the same time introducing a new fine for public drunkenness. This is no more than a trap for vulnerable Territorians, a trap that benefits the alcohol industry and an absolute detriment to Territorians. This is detrimental to Territorians who are struggling with alcohol addiction, who are suffering domestic sexual family violence, and Territorians who are working in the healthcare system. And as for the CLP, who is so committed to reducing crime, there is good evidence that criminalising people with addictions, as well as making access to alcohol cheaper, will actually increase crime in the long term. Like all the legislation the CLP is rushing through this parliament, we are yet again increasing people's contact with the police, putting people in contact with the justice system and fueling the cycles of incarceration and disadvantage. I want to again express my dismay at legislation such as this, which will have very real effects on our community and on individuals being rushed through Parliament. Thank you.
Member for Drysdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill is particularly important to my